way to go through everything I talk about, because for the majority of the stream I'll be on mute just working. So if you're interested in what I have to say about all of this, I'll try to leave timestamps where I start talking. But a introduction for the goal of this stream is that I'm going to be organizing more, organizing my code so that it's a nice foundation to move on forward to working on more of the game. I don't want to leave this code without having that foundation set up, since this is going to be integral to future systems. And then after that, I'm going to be working on creating modular actions, which essentially any action is something a object can do. So for example, this enemy here, the Mole King, can hit, and that's an action. This barrel can be hit and collide with stuff, that's an action. If we had the Mole King open a door, that's an action. Anything an object can do is an action. Aside from like moving or data changing, specifically some sort of event that occurs from the object doing some sort of animation. It's either an animation or a collision trigger. Those are the two ways it can do an action. So I want to have a nice modular way of doing that, not necessarily for streamlining, although that's part of it. It'll help me make actions in a more streamlined way, but most importantly so that the AI can filter out actions based on parameters. So for example, if I had a player attack, let's say you swing a sword, if I had that as a modular action, the intention here is that I could have the AI process the parameters of that modular action and figure out what your attack is going to be, even without knowing what the exact attack is. So for example, the AI won't need to know that the player is doing a sword attack, and like this specific sword attack. So let's say you're doing a swipe with your sword. It doesn't need to know player is doing sword swipe attack with this sword. It just needs to know what are the parameters of this attack that this object is doing. What should I do from these parameters? Maybe that doesn't come across well, but the idea is that an AI will be reacting to any action and what that action does, rather than contextual stuff where it's relying on a very specific action. Hopefully that comes across, but if not, when I start working on it, hopefully it'll make sense. But I'll also explain it more then. I think I'll just start now, go into coding. I'm going to have to take a second to edit the description of this, because when I start streaming it autofills with NVIDIA stuff when I do NVIDIA streaming, but I'm just going to tweak that real quick and then I'll get started. For now, I'm going to be going on mute. Okay, just gonna test real quick how the sound is compared to the music, just to make sure that my voice isn't too loud compared to it, or it isn't too loud compared to my voice. I'm only gonna have this on when I am not talking, just to fill the air, I guess. You can always just mute the stream yourself if you don't want the music on, and then I guess that makes it hard to know when I'm starting to talk, but timestamps will be there for when I'm picking up talking again. But I guess I need to test this on a different device, or else you'll hear two streams going on. So 1 second, then we'll get into it. Okay, that feels about right. Not going to put off setup. Not gonna have to setup take up any more time than that. So let me actually pause this. Yeah, okay. So this seems to be good. Just gonna start coding. We'll see how I feel about doing 720 after this stream. This is mostly just for time capsuling this stuff, so it does suck for it to have to be 720, but I'm okay with this work being scrapped if I end up not liking it. Yeah, if anything, I'll stream video and then do the audio later, because I would rather have the video archived and then I could do like a follow-up audio commentary, not a commentary, but kind of condense everything down in the audio format that I could upload later as a much smaller video. But ideally I could stream just higher quality, but that costs money that I certainly don't want to do right now, considering streaming is just kind of a random thing I decided to do to chronicle development, because I thought it'd be cool. Not even cool now, but cool in like 5-10 years. Look back and see this stuff. Maybe I will have completely given up on games. Maybe I will still be doing games and interested in seeing how it all began. Regardless, I certainly want to capture this stuff, but not keen on capturing it at 720p. But kind of have to right now, or else the audio will get chopped. So, all right, that's enough. I'm gonna start working. So currently I'm facing an interesting design decision, which usually when I've been doing this code, I'm not facing too many design decisions, just system decisions, which aren't quite the same. Um, Basically, sorry, I needed to pause the music for a second. Basically, I'm facing a design decision where I need to figure out how I want to allow the player to cancel actions. So, for example, in some games you can cancel an action once you've begun it. Let's say you begin a forecast here. Just a real quick disclaimer, or I guess explanation beforehand. Every action is broken into forecast, action, post action, and we can substitute different animations in here for different actions. But so you can see right now, this right here, this my action state implicit is going to be what this state he is in at the moment. So this here is just testing purposes. I can close that out and you'll see this is the real stuff. This is just testing, we're setting the state. Because changing this won't actually change the state. This is implicit because it doesn't actually change anything. You can see if I hover over it, I have a tooltip, a surrogate for the state. So it won't actually change anything if I change this, because this isn't the real state, it's just an inspector representation of it, essentially. It's also important for within the code, it's not just an inspector thing. But my point is, look at this value. I'm going a bit too in detail with that. When we look at this here, this test state new, we're in forecast right now, and say something like Dark Souls. Dark Souls, you cannot cancel an action. Pretty sure most actions you cannot cancel. So when we hit this state, you would be stopped from being allowed to change it to another action. So the switch variant is different actions. If I were to change this to 1 right here, you'll see we cancel, we go to idle. So we've effectively canceled that action by calling another one. Now, if you're playing something like Dark Souls, that wouldn't happen. You would continue with it. So I have that set up in some extent here where you can't cancel an action after the forecast phase. So we'll do the forecast again. Go here, we'll do here, and we'll wait till, you can see here now we're in action. So it's forecast, action, post action. So right now we're in action. I don't want the player to be able to cancel out of this, because then it becomes a sort of thing where the most skilled players will always cancel this at the exact moment that the event fires. So for example, when this action starts, the damage is done to this barrel. So you can see here, the action has just begun, but we can see maybe just another second here. I don't think it's doing damage to it, but it's hitting it. So we can see it's hitting the barrel. That event was triggered the moment the Mole King went into his action state. So now we're in post action. If I allowed the player to cancel out of this post action or action, it's not a skill thing. It's just something you have to do if you want to be at the highest level of play. For example, if you've ever heard of reload animation canceling in a first-person shooter game, it's this idea where at some point during your reload, your gun's already reloaded, but the animation is still going. But you can cancel that by switching your weapon, and now you've effectively saved time. So it's not a tactile thing, canceling the animation here. If we were able to cancel the animation and immediately go to idle or go to a different attack, it's just something you would do if you were at a very high level of play. It's not a decision to be made, it's just something you have to get good at. So I don't want that to be a feature in my game. I want it to be that you've done your action, now you have to pay the consequences of the recovery from it. You can't cancel out of it. I don't want there to be a unnecessary skill ceiling that is just a matter of reflexes over skill. Like, or I guess I shouldn't say skill because reflexes are a skill, over like tactics. It doesn't take a smart person to know you press it as fast as you can as soon as the action hits, and then you're good. So I don't want it to do that. But beforehand, before you start an action, that's when I do want you to be able to cancel it. Because it's possible that you haven't done the effect yet, so you're not saving any time, but you could be in the middle of an attack and you decide, oh, I don't want to do this. So say you're swinging at an enemy that you think you're able to hit, and then all of a sudden they start swinging back at you, and you're like, oh shit, I need to dodge. So, for example, in Dark Souls, you can't do that. When you're swinging, you have to commit to it. You're going to get hit because you decided to start swinging. So that's the design decision I've made, is that I'm going to allow players to cancel this. So, because I think this is a skill thing. You have to know when you want to or not want to cancel an action, and I don't want it to be punishing in the sense that you can't cancel out of it, because you should be able to stop that action. I was going to say in the real world you could stop your action, but in the real world you could also stop an action mid-swing, but then it wouldn't do as much, and then I'd have to take that into account, and it'd be this whole thing that I don't necessarily want to have in my game. I'd rather just stop you from canceling an action and post-action. But I'm rambling a bit now. This is to say the current system I have set up, which I have logged here, is that when you attempt to change the action to something else, so let's say you're doing a swipe and you want to go into a dodge, which would be an action as well, just a different variant of an action. Now when that triggers and it says, well, you can't actually do that right now because you're in the middle of a forecast, but what we will do is trigger it to go idle. So it hits and boom, you go idle. You stop that action, but you're not triggering the action you want to do. So let's say you press the dodge, you're not going to dodge, you're going to cancel your previous action. So what I'm thinking about right now is whether or not I should have it that way where you cancel the action, or if it should be the case that you have to, or as soon as you press it, you do the action. So let's say instead of when you press that, it would just immediately go to that action. It would be a bit more complicated in the code, because there would still have to be some time where we switch to idle very quickly, like I'm saying in a span of one frame, switch to idle, switch out those actions, because part of the system I have set up, it's really cool that it's a modular system where actions, this is my animator tree. If you've ever seen Unity, hopefully this is impressive to you that I have all these other actions and this is my animator tree, because essentially what I have is placeholders where it's a placeholder that can be swapped out with other animations. But the drawback to this is that we can't swap out an animation while you're in this placeholder. So for example, this right now is a forecast. This is a forecast of the heavy variant, and then if we go to 0 here, we'll see it switches us to idle, and then if we go to forecast here, this is forecast. So they're both a forecast animations, which means they're being swapped out. So we couldn't do a transition between the two. We would have to go to idle, then to the forecast. So it would be more complex in code, but I'm considering whether or not I want that to be a feature in the first place. Because on paper, it makes sense. Like, if you're looking at game feel, which a lot of people care about, game feel, does your game feel good to play? The answer to that question would be yes, it should immediately do the action you want to do, because that's the action you want to do. Why wouldn't it do it? But it's not always that easy when you're thinking about how you want your game to play specifically. Because when I'm thinking about the action, the reason Dark Souls doesn't let you dodge out of it is because you made the choice to do that action, and you should have had the foresight not to do that action. So we're not going to let you stop it. I think that's a bit too excessive, but I am thinking, if you're going to start an action, shouldn't you be punished at least slightly by being forced to double tap that action? So like, let's say you start up your forecast, you're here in it. Well, I went too long there. Let's go. So you start up your forecast, right? So you're here, you're in your forecast, and you decide, I want to do a different action. So we're going to trigger that. Now, I suppose another issue here is that this isn't stopping it if you press the same action. So let's say you're swinging and then you press the same swing button. It doesn't cancel it, although I would say that makes sense, because let's say you double tap the action button, it shouldn't cancel itself out. It also shouldn't trigger it, which I think is what it does now. So I should have a check that if you're in a state, it doesn't switch states. Like, it shouldn't restart a state. That's something I can put right now. But essentially, it switches to idle, and then you would have to press that input again. So this, you can think of this testing as a player input. The player inputs again, let's say they press a button and it does the attack that they wanted to do, and now they start it. And then they go, wait, no. Okay, I want to do this one actually. So then it goes to idle, then they've got to input it again, and it goes, okay, there. Now you're doing this one. And now it's like, oh, wait. Well, now you're too late. You're in the action. You cannot cancel this. It's not going to let you do it. So I'm thinking that makes more sense. I think it looks more natural. I guess when you're the player, it certainly wouldn't matter that you're canceling it like that. But yeah, I think this is what I want to go for. It's something I can change later. I know the process for it. I essentially would just come back to this code and change it. I think I'm going to change this to maybe a warning, because warnings are basically things I will never read until the game's near completion, because Unity throws out warnings, and so I get caught up with they throw warnings for a whole bunch of stuff, basically stuff that you don't need to change, at least not wrap mode. So like stuff like this might even be, I think, did I comment this? I think this is from a long time ago. So yeah, you can see there's warnings. Some are Unity, some are me, whereas I don't really need to check like all of these. I'm never actually going to look at this stuff. So warnings are basically things I'll never check until the game's about to launch, because that's when I should really be checking the warnings. So yeah, I'll keep there. So yeah, I think it's kind of the first design decision I've gone over, is going over the design of, should I let you cancel? Should I force you to have to cancel an ability before doing a new one? Or should I immediately go to that next ability that you want to do? And I'm thinking I'm going to go with cancel. Or that you have to go to idle first. That feels more fair to me. It may not feel like, in terms of game feel, and it may not feel the best, but I think it is the best choice. So what was that other thing I was thinking of? I was thinking of, it shouldn't be able to, shouldn't restart an action. So actually you can see this in some games where you can see someone kind of repeatedly start an action, maybe in like a fighting game or something. You can see someone continually do a wind up. I think I broke it there because I changed the code. Okay. You can see wind up, we're still in forecast. So like in a fighting game, someone might keep spamming the wind up so that they keep starting and you never know when they're going to actually do it. It's like you could just keep going and starting. And now we're in that action, so we can't do it, but I'm sure you've seen it if you played a fighting game. It's a common thing, not even fighting games, but just really like online games. You'll see your opponent kind of spam an ability because they know they can keep resetting it, and I don't really want that to be a thing. It's certainly not a thing the enemies would do, like the boss wouldn't do that, obviously. It would look really jarring, but I don't want the player to be able to do it. So I can easily fix that real quick by doing a check that in the calls. We want to go to the calls in our controller. So this handles all actions, basically anything that can happen to an object is processed here first. So what we want to do is call event state. When we go here, if is call valid, we want to go if call. Actually, we should put this in the handler, because the handler makes a bit more sense. If is handled good action, we're going to go here. We're going to go to switch. Before we do the switch, we want to do this. If new state action is equal to manager.action script.my state action, then we're going to do return false. If state is already. So if the state is already set to the state, do not process. For example, we're passing in forecast, don't change it to forecast. So this should fix it, just that simple fix there. So the way I have it set up is that every call has to get processed. First, it gets processed by technical restraints. So does it have the proper components to run this method? If so, then run it. If not, don't. Then we go to the handler, which checks more conditional stuff, which is like, let's say your player is immune because they picked up the Mario star and they can't take any damage. Then that's a handle. That's where we handle it and take into account that stuff. So I think this makes more sense to be in the handle because we're checking a conditional thing, which is what is the current state, not a technical thing like, does this even have these following states that could possibly be switched to, which is part of the call. In the call we have here, if we're able to find the action. If find action by name, then process, because that's part of a technical constraint, not a conditional one. So that's how I differentiate between a call and a handle. It may not make sense in the strict definitions of the words, but that's how I've decided to have my system work. So it should be the case now that if we do the forecast and then spam it, like I was talking about, we will not be able to keep spamming it. So let's see, we're still in forecast. Switch it here. Yeah, it's not letting us. Okay. Now, I should have just caused an issue where that it won't change the variant now either. Yep, okay. So now it also won't found action. We should log something here. We should say why we're failing to do it, because here I have an explanation of why it's failed. Yeah, so here we explain why it failed. We should have one of these here as well, in case I ever need to see why. Switching state is not allowed. Switching state is not allowed as current state is parameter state. But what we should actually do is pass in the variant here. What we should do is if the state and, well, okay, let me think. For passing in the variance, we can do it here as well. Yes, if we do this and variance is not equal to manager.action state dot my action variant. Okay. We're gonna have two layers here. This is the way I prefer to do it when I'm doing this handling. Specifically in these handle situations, I prefer to have it kind of go through each possible process. Especially in this case where, I guess, no, not especially in this case, but I like having it in one line, two lines, like each check is going to be on one line for these handles. I don't do that in other places of code where I have checks happening, but this place specifically, I want to have each conditional check be on its own line. That's just the way I'm kind of dealing with this situation. But so now I am going to set that up. So now we're checking is the action and if this should be, if the variant is equal, so if the state is equal and the variant is equal. And a note here, the reason I could do variant first and then state first, I mean, it just naturally makes sense to do state first and then variant second because that's the order they go. But it also makes sense in terms of the performance power of these two checks. I was saying in my previous stream how an enum is just a number to the computer. So the idle is 0, the forecast is 1, action 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We could actually change these two. Like if I wanted this to be 10 for some reason, you could do that. Doesn't make sense in this case, but let's say you had like movement directions like left, center, right. You could have left be -1, center be 0, right be 1. Whereas normally they would be 0, 1, 2. So that's a situation where you might want to do something like that. But basically you can have just these numbers here, and that's a quick check because you're just saying, is 0 equal to 0? Yes. Is 0 equal to 1? No. But the variant check, we're checking a string. So this can be a string of any value, and it needs to go through and iterate through each character of the string and compare those characters. So instead of comparing one value integers, we're comparing unknown length strings, which is a more performance check. It really doesn't matter that much, especially when you're talking about games, because the majority of process power goes into rendering, but might as well write code that's optimized, especially when doing so doesn't really cause any issues. But probably didn't need to share that little trick. I think I get too interested in sharing all the small little details. Then I end up going off on something like enums instead of the issue at hand. But so you can see now we do the forecast and it should be able to switch. So if you go forecast here, then we switch it to a different attack. We will idle. We do that attack again. We'll start that other attack. Then we're still in forecast here. Go to this one, idle. And now if we do that same action, start it up, forecast still, do the same action we're doing right now, nothing happens. Still in forecast, do it, nothing happens. And we can see in the console that's true. So we can see when we tried to fire this event. You can see, let's see here. So you can see we started the forecast here, and handling of action state failed. Switching state is not allowed as current state forecast is equal to parameter state forecast. This is a note I made earlier about this sort of thing, and we fixed it, so I'll go ahead and get rid of that. All right, hopefully that makes sense. I wanted to show that little design decision and then ended up showing how to fix a different error as well, which was kind of the ability to input spam, which technically isn't even an error. It's something a lot of games have. I don't know if they have it by choice or just by the nature of their systems, like they never planned for players to do that. Reload canceling could be the same thing. Like the way I have, you cannot cancel an action once it's begun. I can't say that every studio has actions broken up like this. So it could be possible that the entire action is one thing. So they either let the player cancel it or they don't. There's no kind of phases to it like this. I really don't know what other studios would do, but in my case, I have the luxury of deciding which ones the player should be allowed to break out of, and I've decided they can break out of forecast, they cannot break out of action or post-action, because that's not a skill, or that's not a tactical decision, it's a mandatory decision for anyone who wants to be high skilled at the game, and therefore it shouldn't be allowed. That's how I feel about it. If it just causes more, if it just raises the skill ceiling in a way that only adds more complexity without it being a tactile thing, like a choice, like a mandatory complexity, I don't really see a point in that. I'm far more interested in tactile complexity where it's more decision making that you have to do. So allowing you to cancel animations, I think, adds more decision making because it presents the opportunity to change what you're doing, which is a decision to be made. And it's also a little bit kinder than just forcing you to have to do an action. But yeah, we have that canceling working. And I've got to rotate laundry. So I think I'll go back on mute, go rotate laundry real quick, and get back to cleaning up some code.